Wyoming Territory, late 1887. The valley was still recovering from the Great Die-Up. The wind did not just blow across the high plains. It shrieked like a banshee in the dark. It was a serrated blade of ice. It bit into the soul of anyone brave enough to listen. The white landscape was a graveyard of ambition and cattle. Eliza Vance stood by her small cabin window. Ice crystals bloomed in the corners like jagged, frozen lace. She watched the tall buffalo grass bend. It bowed under the weight of an early, cruel frost. The sky was a heavy, bruised gray. It looked like a lead ceiling pressing down on the Wyoming dirt. This was the year the cattle industry struggled to breathe. History would remember it as the long shadow left by the Great Die-Up. But for Eliza, it was simply the end of hope. Her hands were red and chapped. The skin was cracked around her swollen, aching knuckles. They were the hands of a woman who did the work of two men. They were the hands of a survivor who was losing the fight. Her husband, Nathan, had been gone for 14 months. The mountain fever had taken him in the heat of July. He had been strong on a Monday. He had been a memory by Tuesday. The ground had been too hard to dig deeply. She had buried him under the shadow of the twin cottonwoods. He had left her with 40 acres of rocky, stubborn soil. He had left her with a 5-year-old daughter named Lily, and he had left her with Silver.
Silver was a white stallion with eyes like a clear summer sky. He was a magnificent, powerful creature. His coat was the color of a high mountain cloud. He was the only thing of value left on the Vance property. The cattle were gone. The sheep had been lost to the wolves in the unrelenting cold. Eliza looked at the heavy iron stove in the corner. It was cold and silent. It was a hollow monument to better times. The wood pile outside was dangerously low. Only a few crooked logs remained. The flour barrel in the pantry was empty. There wasn't enough left to hide the truth from Lily anymore. Soon her little girl would know what real hunger felt like. She had scraped the bottom this morning. She had heard the dry rasp of wood against the metal hoop. There was nothing left but fine white dust. It wasn't enough to make a single biscuit for a hungry child. The silence of the house was a heavy weight. She reached into her apron pocket. Her fingers brushed against a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper. She pulled it out with trembling, frozen hands. She smoothed it against the rough wood of the kitchen table. It was a notice from the tax office in Cheyenne. The ink was dark and unforgiving. The debt was $10. Under territorial tax rules, unpaid property could be placed up for auction. To a wealthy rancher, $10 was a fine dinner and whiskey. To Eliza, it was the distance between a roof and the killing sky. The notice said the payment was due by Friday.
Today was Tuesday. If she did not pay, the land would be auctioned. The law did not care about grieving widows. The law did not care about children with hollow cheeks. She turned her head to look at Lily. The little girl was sitting on a faded, braided rug. She was trying to mend a rag doll with a piece of rough twine. Her small fingers were clumsy with the cold. Lily's cheeks were pale. They were not as plump as they used to be last spring. Her eyes seemed too large for her face. Eliza felt a sharp, twisting pain in her chest. It was the crushing fear that she had failed her child. It was the agony of a mother who could not provide bread. She walked to the door. She grabbed her heavy wool shawl from the iron peg. It was thinning at the elbows. The fringe was frayed and stained with Red Valley mud. "Lily, put on your coat," Eliza said. Her voice was steady. She forced the tremor out of it with sheer will, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Are we going to town, Mama?" Lily asked. She looked up with a spark of hope. Town meant the smell of the bakery. Town meant the possibility of a single peppermint stick. "No, sweetheart," Eliza replied. She knelt down to button Lily's coat. The buttons were loose, held by thin threads. "We are going to visit Mr.
Thorne. Lily's face fell slightly. She knew the stories told by the townspeople. Everyone knew about Garrett Thorne. He owned the largest ranch in the entire valley. The Diamond T was a kingdom of grass and stone. Mr. Thorne was a man of few words and very hard edges. They said he had a heart made of Wyoming granite. They said he was as cold as the north wind. They said he didn't have room for mercy in his ledger. But Nathan had always spoken well of him. Nathan had said Garrett Thorne was a man of his word. He had said Garrett respected a good horse more than a rich man. Eliza led Silver out of the small, drafty barn. The stallion nuzzled her shoulder. His breath was warm against her neck. It smelled of the last of the sweet mountain hay. Silver knew something was wrong. He could feel the tension in her calloused hands. He followed her willingly as she began the long walk. The Thorne Ranch was 6 miles away. 6 miles of frozen ruts and biting wind. The ground was hard and unforgiving under her thin boots. Every step felt like a mile. Lily held onto Eliza's hand tightly. The little girl's legs were short. She struggled to keep up with the pace. The wind picked up, driving frozen grit around their feet. It stung their eyes and cracked their lips.
Whenever Lily's steps began to fail, Eliza lifted her onto Silver's saddle. She led the stallion onward through the biting gale. The horse walked with a gentle, rhythmic grace. He seemed to understand the precious cargo he carried. Eliza didn't look back at her cabin. She didn't look at the smokeless chimney. She couldn't afford the luxury of regret. Regret was for those with full bellies. Every step was a step toward survival. They reached the great gates of the Thorne Ranch by noon. The gates were made of heavy timber and wrought iron. The main house was magnificent and intimidating. It was built of solid, dark pine. It had 2 stories and a wide wraparound porch. It looked like a fortress against the wilderness. It looked like it could withstand 100 winters. Garrett Thorne was in the main corral. He was working with a young, stubborn bay mare. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat. His hat was pulled low over his brow. He saw them approaching and stopped his work. He didn't say a word of greeting. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a dark handkerchief. He watched the woman. He watched the child. He watched the white horse. He didn't move toward them. He waited for them to come to him. Eliza stopped 10 feet from the fence. She stood as tall as her tired bones would allow. She adjusted her shawl with dignity. She would not beg. She would not bow. "Mr. Thorne," she called out. Her voice carried through the thin, frozen air. Garrett stepped through the gate. He moved with a quiet, dangerous grace. He didn't take off his hat, but he nodded respectfully to her. "Mrs. Vance," he said. His voice was deep and resonant. It sounded like the rumble of a distant summer storm. "Is there trouble at your place?" Eliza took a deep, shaky breath. The cold air burned her lungs. She led Silver forward a few paces. The horse tossed his head, his mane flying like white silk. "I have come to make you an offer," she said. Garrett looked at the horse. His eyes narrowed as he appraised the animal. He looked at the straight, powerful legs. He looked at the broad, deep chest. He knew Silver's bloodline. He knew the horse was worth $50 in any market. He knew it was the finest animal in the county. "I'm listening," he said simply. He leaned against the fence post.
Eliza's voice trembled for the first time. She hated the weakness in her own throat. "I need $10, she said. "I want you to buy Silver." Every word felt like another piece of her heart breaking away. She wasn't selling a horse. She was surrendering the last promise she had made to Nathan. Garrett looked from the horse to the woman. He saw the desperation in her blue eyes. It was a look he had seen too many times on the frontier. He saw how Lily was hiding behind her mother's skirts. He saw the child's red, cold-nipped nose. He saw the thinness of their wool coats. $10? Garrett asked. He frowned, his dark brows knitting together. "That horse is worth 5 times that much, Eliza." "I know what he is worth," she snapped. Her pride was stinging like an open wound. "But I don't have time for a fair price. The taxman comes on Friday. If I don't have $10, I lose the house. I lose the land Nathan bled for. Please, Mr. Thorne, buy him. Take him into your barn where he will be fed. I can't keep his belly full anymore. I can't even keep my daughter's belly full." Garrett remained silent for a long, agonizing moment. The wind whistled between them like a blade.
He reached out and touched Silver's muzzle. The horse didn't flinch. The animal recognized a true horseman's hand. "I won't buy this horse for $10, Garrett said. His voice was flat and final. He lowered his eyes for a moment. The decision clearly hurt him as much as it hurt her. Eliza felt her knees grow weak. The world seemed to tilt and spin. The gray sky felt like it was falling on her head. "Then we are lost," she whispered. The words were barely audible over the wind. She turned to lead the horse away. She didn't know where she would take Lily before nightfall. Her vision was blurred with tears she refused to shed. "Wait," Garrett called out. His voice was louder now, commanding. He walked toward her. The frozen ground crunched beneath his heavy boots. He looked down at Lily. The girl was staring up with wide, fearful eyes. "I won't buy the horse," he repeated. "But I have a different proposal, a different way to settle the debt." Eliza looked at him with sharp suspicion. She had heard how men could be to desperate women. "My house is too big for one man," Garrett said. He looked back at the massive timber structure. "My kitchen is a disaster of grease and burnt coffee. The pantry is a mess of wasted supplies.
The laundry is piling up in the corners. My books are a disaster of ink and bad math. I need a manager, Eliza. I need someone to turn this house into a home again." Eliza stared at him, utterly confused. She looked at the massive house. She looked back at his stern, weathered face. "I know you aren't asking for charity," he continued, "and I would never ask you to surrender your pride. I'm offering honest work and an honest wage. I'm offering a trade, a business arrangement. Bring your things here. Bring the girl. Live in the guest wing. It has its own stove and its own door. You manage the ranch house and the supplies. You keep your land in your name. I will pay your taxes today, and Silver stays in your care, in my stable. I'd rather give you both a home than take your horse." Garrett wasn't certain she would accept. For the first time in years, rejection made him uneasy. Eliza felt a single tear escape. It rolled down her cold, wind-burnt cheek. She wiped it away quickly with the back of her hand. "Why would you do this?" she asked. She searched his face for a trick. She looked for a hidden, dark motive. Garrett looked toward the distant, jagged mountains.
The peaks were white with eternal snow. "Because Nathan helped me during the blizzard of '81, he said. His voice was soft now, almost a whisper. I was stranded and half frozen near the creek. My horse had broken its leg in a drift. He brought me in and fed me. He gave me his own bed. He never asked for a dime. A man doesn't forget a debt like that. The choice is yours, Eliza." Eliza looked at her daughter. Lily looked tired and dangerously cold. She looked like she might collapse where she stood. Eliza looked at the white horse. Silver deserved a warm stall and golden oats. She looked at the man offering a lifeline. "We will come," she said softly. Garrett nodded once. It was a gesture as final as a signed contract. "I'll send a wagon for your trunks this evening. Don't worry about the wood at the cabin. I'll have my men shutter it so it stays safe. Go inside the kitchen now. The side door is unlocked. My cook left last month. There's bread and beef stew on the stove. Eat your fill." As Eliza walked toward the house, the weight lifted. But she knew the road ahead would not be easy. In the Wyoming Territory, people talked.
Gossip was like a wildfire on the summer prairie. A widow moving into a bachelor's ranch was a scandal. Even with a child, the tongues would wag. But Eliza didn't care about the tongues of the town. She didn't care about the whispers in the general store. She cared about the warmth of a real fire. She cared about the fresh, creamy milk in Lily's cup. She cared about the safety of her horse. The first week was a whirlwind of labor. The weeks slowly settled into a quiet rhythm. Morning coffee, shared chores, evening silence beside the fire. Without noticing it, loneliness began leaving the house.
If you believe a true home is built through kindness, leave a heart in the comments for Eliza and Lily.
Eliza threw herself into the grime and the dust. She wanted to earn every penny of those taxes. The house was indeed a mess. Dust covered every surface like a thick gray blanket. Cobwebs hung from the high rafters.
The pantry was filled with spoiled bacon and weevils. It was a house, but it was not a home. It was just a place where a man slept. Garrett stayed out in the fields most of the day. He was preparing for the deep coming winter. The terrible losses of the previous winter still haunted every rancher. He brought in extra hay for the cattle. He reinforced the gates of the calving pens. He worked alongside his men in the freezing mud. He was a man who prepared for the worst.
He knew the Wyoming winter was a predator. At night, they sat in the large living room. The fireplace was huge, made of smooth river stone. The logs crackled and popped with rhythmic comfort. Garrett would read the newspaper by the fire. He would smoke a pipe, the scent of cherry tobacco rising. Eliza would sew or mend clothes for Lily. She would knit socks for the coming freeze. They rarely spoke to one another. They were like two ships passing in the night. But the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who knew the cost of survival. It was the silence of mutual, hard-earned respect. It was the silence of shared burdens. One afternoon, Eliza was in the barn. She was grooming Silver with a stiff brush. The stallion's coat was starting to shine again. His eyes were bright and alert. She heard low, muffled voices near the entrance. It was two of the ranch hands. Dutch was a tall man with a mean streak. Slim was shorter and followed Dutch like a shadow. They didn't know she was there. "Think he's gonna marry her?" Dutch asked. He spat dark tobacco juice into the clean straw. "Or is she just a high-priced cook with a pretty face?" Slim laughed, a dry and dusty sound. "Garrett Thorne don't do nothing without a reason," Slim said. "Maybe he just wants that horse in the 40 acres. A woman's easier to break than a stallion."
"He'll have the deed by spring. You mark my words." Eliza froze in the stall. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Anger surged through her. It drove the cold from her body. She stepped out from the stall. She held the grooming brush like a weapon. "If you have something to say it to my face," she challenged. The men turned, looking genuinely surprised. Dutch tipped his hat, but his eyes were mocking. "Just talking, Mrs. Vance," he said. He didn't look sorry. "No harm meant by it." "Then keep your talk to the cattle," Eliza said. "They are the only ones who might care for your opinions. And if I hear you speak of my husband's land again, I'll tell Mr. Thorne. I imagine he won't be as polite as I am." She watched them walk away. She realized then that her dignity was at stake. She wasn't just a guest or a worker. She was a target for their small minds. She had to prove her worth every single day. She had to be beyond her approach. That evening, Garrett noticed she was quiet. She didn't look at him during dinner. "Something wrong with the stew?" he asked. He looked at his plate.
"The stew is fine," Eliza said. She set her fork down with a sharp clink. "The neighbors are not." Garrett set his heavy spoon down. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "The boys were talking?" "They think I am a charity case," Eliza said. "They think you are waiting to take my land like a thief. They think I am being broken like a horse." Garrett leaned back in his chair. The old wood creaked under his weight. "Let them think what they want," he said. His voice was like tempered iron. "I know the truth. You know the truth. That's all that matters in this territory. People will always talk when they have nothing to do." "It matters to me," Eliza insisted. "I want to pay you back for the taxes. I want every cent recorded in a book. I want to know when I have earned my way." Garrett looked at her for a long time. The firelight danced in his dark, deep eyes. "You are a proud woman, Eliza Vance. Just like Nathan was. He had the same kind of steel in him. Fine. I'll keep a ledger in the office. We will count your work against the debt. But don't expect me to stop being a neighbor."
A neighbor helps because it's right, not because of a ledger. The winter finally showed its teeth in December. The temperature plummeted overnight. The mercury in the thermometer hid in the bulb. The sky turned a heavy, bruised purple. Garrett became even more focused. He barely slept more than 4 hours a night. He was out in the bone-chilling cold for 18 hours. He was fighting the elements for his livelihood. Eliza noticed how thin he was getting. His face was drawn and haggard. He was giving his extra rations to the men. He was pushing himself to the absolute limit. He wanted to ensure no cattle were lost.
He was a man who felt responsible for every soul. She realized she was falling in love. Not with the ranch, not with the safety, but with the man beneath the granite. The realization frightened her. That night she whispered Nathan's name into the darkness. Then she cried because another man's face was beginning to fill her prayers. She felt a twinge of guilt for her feelings. She felt like she was betraying her past. She wondered if loving again meant forgetting. Deep inside, she already knew it did not. One night, Garrett didn't come in for dinner. The sun had set hours ago. The world was a void of black and white.
Eliza waited by the window. She paced the floor of the kitchen. The snow was falling so thick she couldn't see the barn. The wind was howling like a wounded animal. It was a roar that never stopped. She wrapped herself in her heaviest shawl. She put on her thickest wool coat. She told Lily to stay by the fire. "Don't open the door for anyone but me," she warned. Eliza stepped out onto the porch. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet. It was a physical wall of ice. The cold was like a blow to the face. It stole the breath from her lungs. She fought her way toward the stable. She moved hand over hand along the guide rope. The snow was up to her knees. She found Garrett collapsed near the trough. He was face down in a drift of white. His lantern had gone out. His face was a terrifying shade of blue. His hands were frozen stiff as boards. The tips of 2 fingers had already turned an alarming shade of gray. He was unresponsive to her touch. Eliza screamed for Dutch and Slim. Her voice was nearly lost in the gale. She grabbed Garrett by the shoulders. She pulled with everything she had. She was a woman possessed by purpose. The men finally came running from the bunkhouse.
They saw the dark shape in the snow. They carried Garrett into the main house. They laid him on the rug by the fire. Eliza took charge immediately. She didn't hesitate. "Get his boots off," she commanded. "Slim, get more wood for the fire. Dutch, bring me the heavy blankets. Boil water now." Dutch quietly whispered, "If we don't warm him now, he'll lose those fingers." Eliza spent the night warming him. She wrapped warm blankets around him. She held his frozen hands between her own for hours. She worked until her own arms ached. She prayed, which she hadn't prayed since Nathan died. "Don't you leave us, Garrett Thorne," she whispered. "Don't you dare leave this world yet. We need you. I need you." By morning, warmth had finally returned to his face and hands. The room was quiet, save for the fire. The storm had turned into a soft fall of flakes. Garrett opened his eyes slowly. He saw Eliza sitting in a chair by his side. She was exhausted, hair falling out of its pins. There were dark circles under her eyes. But to him, she looked like an angel. "You're a stubborn woman," he rasped. His throat was raw from the cold.
"And you're a foolish man," she replied. She tried to sound stern, but her voice cracked with emotion. "You can't save every cow if you're dead. The ranch needs its master." Garrett reached out a shaky hand. He touched her wrist gently. His touch was warm now. "Thank you, Eliza. I owe you my life." The feeling slowly returned to his fingers over the following days. He kept them, though the cold would ache in his hand every minute afterward. The blizzard lasted for 3 more days. The world was buried in a sea of white. The drifts reached the second-story windows. When the sun came out, the landscape was transformed. The ranch had survived the worst of it. The cattle were mostly safe in the draws. Garrett stood on the porch, looking at the destruction. "We have extra supplies in the cellar," he said. "Load the wagons. We're going to help those people. They are our neighbors." Eliza helped pack the wooden crates. She put in the preserves she had made. She put in the blankets she had mended. She put in bags of grain and salted meat. They spent the next week traveling. The horses struggled through the deep snow. Eliza saw women who looked just like she had. She saw the hollow eyes of hunger. She handed out bread and hope. She realized Garrett hadn't just saved her. He was the silent heart of the valley. He kept the community together in secret. He never took credit for his kindness. He never asked for a single thank you. One afternoon, they stopped at a leaning shack. A young mother was crying on the porch. Her husband had been lost in the storm. Garrett handed her a heavy bag of flour. He gave her bacon and a warm coat. Garrett just tipped his hat and walked away. He didn't want the praise of men. Eliza followed him into the snow. "Why don't you let them thank you?" she asked. "Words are cheap, Eliza," he said. "Action is what keeps a person alive. A man's worth is measured in what he does when no one is looking." Eliza felt a deep swell of emotion. That night, she found a box on her table. It was made of dark, polished wood. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was Nathan's gold pocket watch. The glass was clean, the gold shining. She had sold it to a pawnbroker months ago to buy Lily's medicine. There was a small, handwritten note inside. "A woman should keep her memories. They are the only things the wind can't take." It was signed simply, G. Eliza broke down and cried. She cried for the husband she had lost. She cried for the struggle she endured. And she cried for the kindness of Garrett Thorne. He had gone into town in secret. He had tracked down the watch at a pawnshop in Cheyenne. He had bought it back with his own money. The next morning, she found him in the barn. He was checking Silver's hooves. "I can't accept the watch, Garrett," she said. Garrett didn't look up from his work. "It's already paid for," he said. "The money is gone from my pocket. It belongs with you." Eliza walked up and turned him around. She took his hands in hers. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Garrett sighed and took off his hat. "At first, maybe it was about Nathan," he admitted. "But then I saw you at the gate. I saw how you fought for that girl. You have a fire in you, Eliza. You don't break under the weight. This ranch was cold before you got here. Now it's a home. I don't want you to pay me back. I don't want a ledger. I just want you to stay." Eliza felt her breath catch in her throat. "As a housekeeper?" she asked softly.
Garrett shook his head slowly. "No. As my wife, if you'll have a man rough at the edges?" Eliza looked into his honest eyes. "I already have the horse for the wedding," she joked. She was crying and laughing at once. Garrett pulled her into his strong arms. He held her like she was precious. But the path was not without thorns. The town preacher refused to marry them. He claimed Eliza hadn't mourned long enough. The townspeople whispered at the store. She traded her virtue for a big house, they said. Eliza wanted to hide from the world, but Garrett wouldn't let her hide in shame. On Sunday, he dressed in his best suit. He put Lily in her finest blue dress. He led them into the center of town. He walked into the store where gossip was thick. "I hear talk about my future wife," Garrett said. His voice was quiet, but terrifying. The room went deathly silent. "Eliza Vance is a woman of honor," he said. "She saved my life in the blizzard, while you all sat by your warm fires. Any man who says otherwise answers to me." No one said a word in response. They knew Garrett Thorne didn't make idle threats. He bought a bag of peppermints for Lily. He bought a silk ribbon for Eliza. He walked out with his head held high. Dutch and Slim had apologized weeks earlier. They had watched Eliza save Garrett and work beside every man on the ranch. From that day forward, neither one questioned her courage or her honor again. They were married 2 weeks later. A circuit preacher traveling through the valley performed the ceremony. He cared more about their devotion than narrow-minded gossip. They stood on the wide porch of the ranch. The mountains rose around them like the walls of a cathedral. The blue sky stretched endlessly overhead. Dutch and Slim stood as witnesses. Lily held a bouquet of dried wildflowers. As the sun set, the sky turned to gold. Garrett looked at his new bride. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thorne," he said. The years that followed were hard, but they faced every challenge together. Eliza's 40 acres were never sold. They became a sanctuary for old horses. Silver lived to a very ripe old age. His coat stayed white as the winter snow. Lily grew up strong and independent. She had her mother's fire and Nathan's quiet strength. Eliza often thought back to that day. She thought about the empty flour barrel. She thought about the desperation at the gate. Life turns tragedy into a blessing. Some storms steal everything we think we need.
Others quietly lead us toward the people we were meant to find. On the Wyoming frontier, one woman walked 6 frozen miles to sell a horse. Instead, she found a home. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and join us for another journey into the Old West. Good night.